Well, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing our president, Jim Zins. And he's going to give us a discussion, a lecture on success. And he asked me to give this introduction, and I'm very honored. I've known Jim for over 30 years. I knew him as I was an intern at the Cleveland Clinic. He's been a mentor of mine. He's been an advisor, and he's been a political advisor too. And almost daily, I seek his help. Can I have the first slide, please? You know, when they talk about success, you know, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And this is Jim's dad, who's 90, I think 95, and incredibly active still. Was a pilot till late in his years. He was also a physician. And Jim, I'm sure Jim, into his late 90s, will still be practicing medicine. He's had a platinum career, a platinum education. Phillips Exeter Academy, Princeton University, University of Pennsylvania. And as you can see, he was mentored by one of the best, Dr. Linton Whitaker. Did his craniofacial fellow, plastic surgery, and did his maxillofacial fellowship in London at Great Ormond Street. You can tell the personality of somebody by being in their office, can't you? And this is a poster that's in Jim's office. It says, "The speed of the leader determines the rate of the pack." And that truly is Jim Zins. He is the hardest working plastic surgeon I know of. And I can tell you, this is no joke. He's always saving everything he can. He's always economically minded. And he swaps the deck just like any other person. And is truly a team player. He's been chairman of plastic surgery at the Cleveland Clinic for 26 years. And that is the longest acting surgical subspecialty chairman in the history of the Cleveland Clinic. He's head of the section of cosmetic surgery and started our aesthetic fellowship, which, by the way, is not funded by the department or the institute. He totally funds this through outside agencies and philanthropy. He's been professor of surgery. He sits on multiple editorial boards, wrote close to 200 papers, peer-reviewed publications, 16 book chapters, and 1 textbook. He's also very fashionable. He's been president of the Northeast Ohio Society of Plastic Surgery, president of the Ohio Valley, senior board examiner, and now, as you know, current board director of the Board of Plastic Surgery, and your president this year as the American Association of Plastic Surgeons. There's many loves of his life, but his first love is his wife, Cindy. And he met Cindy actually while he was a resident in Pennsylvania, and they've been together ever since, both plastic surgeons. And so I can imagine what they talk about when they go home. I'm sure it's not all about hand surgery and plastic surgery. Jim's second love is baseball. And here he is, I think with his mother, playing baseball. And I think he was an excellent pitcher, if I remember right. And certainly this carries. And his favorite baseball player is Jackie Robinson. Truly the underdog is what Jim Zins is all about. Rooting for the underdog and bringing the underdog up to the best of their capabilities. Jim's also love is leadership and success, especially the presidencies. I think Jim Zins has read every book about biography or autobiography about presidents in the United States. And one of his favorites is about Lyndon B. Johnson. He and I love to banter about politics. We do it weekly. I'm conservative. Let's put it this way, you're somewhat less than conservative. And one of the quotes that I always like is from this Lyndon B. Johnson quote, which is, "Books and ideas are the most effective weapons against intolerance and ignorance." Though, Jim, I don't think you've ever read this book. Now, you know, despite that, I know Jim is somewhat liberal, but I've known Jim again for 30-some years, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I can convince him to change around, you know? So, you know, I was able to get him invited to the inauguration of our president this year, and you know, Jim didn't show. He didn't show up. So we were kind of concerned about Jim, where he was, and so we got another Clevelander that I knew, James Comey, to help us find out, you know, and really investigate where Jim was. And actually, there was some, you probably saw it on CNN or C-SPAN, there was some email investigation going on about Jim. And sure enough, we were able to find some things out. And, that Jim does have a past. He does have a past, as I suspected. And you can see by this picture in the OR where he's giving you the peace sign. Jim is a product of the 60s. And he's truly a tree-hugging liberal. I know he talks about his favorite things, which is wolves and stuff like that, but he truly, truly is a liberal. And I finally found that out. So we've asked some other individuals that we knew to investigate him a little bit more and see what we can find and why he didn't show up for the inauguration. And we produced this dossier on Jim. He was really trying to be naturalized as a Canadian citizen. And certainly these are all his things that we're able to find. And so I hope you like hockey, Jim. So, and finally, Jim is finally given his oath, and he's both a Canadian citizen in addition to a U.S., and I hope he enjoys it. So I want to thank you, Jim, as being not just a friend, but a mentor. Over 60 residents and fellows that you've taught. Being the longest acting chairman at the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm sure there's another 26 years to come. Thank you very much.
Well, that's going to be a hard act to follow. So, as Frank said, this is the title of the talk. So, what is success? So is a successful plastic surgeon that plastic surgeon who has the biggest house? Is it the plastic surgeon with the longest CV? Or is it that surgeon with the highest of academic excellence who's been president of every society, every professional society known to man? Or is it that plastic surgeon with that perfect balance between personal and professional balance? Now, I know we work hard, and we pat ourselves on the back for it. But there are a lot of other people who work just as hard as we do. They're just as focused, and they're just as driven. So let's walk out of the microcosm of plastic surgery for the next few minutes, and let's see if we can learn anything else about success from some other venues, and learn something about leadership from some other venues aside from plastic surgery. So a number of years ago, I was at a 7 a.m. leadership conference at the clinic, and our head of professional staff affairs announced the guest speaker. And this older man with big ears, rumpled suit, tall, shuffles up to the podium, and he starts shuffling through some note cards. So I say, oh my God, I got up at 5:30 in the morning to listen to this. At which point, he put the note cards down and he said, instead, I'm going to tell you the story of my life. And what a life it was. So Peter Lewis, his father was a co-founder with Jack Green of a small automobile insurance company called Progressive Insurance. And Peter Lewis was the heir apparent of the heir apparent CEO. Unfortunately, his father passed away at the very young age of 48 years old, and all of a sudden, Peter Lewis, instead of being the heir apparent, was the son of the deceased former executive. He graduated from college, and he started at the bottom. He started as an insurance appraiser assistant. And he started to build his way up through his father's former company. 8 years later, he and his mother bought the company from Jack Green, and he became the CEO. And he immediately initiated some consumer-friendly efforts. What they did was they posted all the premiums for Progressive Insurance on their website, okay? But they also posted the premiums of his competitors to make things easy for the consumer. Probably more importantly, what he did was he hired a slew of executives and a slew of employees young, aggressive, bright people who really helped build the company. When he took over the company, there were 40 employees. 8 years later, there were 100 employees, and there was an annual revenue of $6.5 million. When he passed away a few years ago, there were 1,750 employees with an annual revenue of $14 billion. So Peter Lewis at that time was worth $1.6 billion. He made the single largest contribution to Princeton University in the history of the school. He funded Weatherhead School of Business, and he got the very famous architect, Frank Gehry, to build the Weatherhead School. But he was very involved in any of his philanthropy. In fact, when he was very unhappy with the incompetence of the Case Western Reserve trustees, he didn't put a moratorium on Case Western Reserve. He put a moratorium on philanthropy for the entire city of Cleveland until that mess was cleaned up. This was a man of great imagination. This didn't just happen by luck. All you had to do was go look at the annual survey, the annual report of the company to see how innovative this man was. So the first thing Peter said at this lecture was, my first lesson was, nobody gets anywhere without hard work. And number two was, it's very helpful to be born to a rich mother. Now, that was said in jest, of course, but it's extremely important where you come from, and it's extremely important to your ultimate success. If you're like Peter Lewis, and you're like me, and you're like many of you in the audience, and you were born on third base, it's a lot easier to score than if you haven't even gotten to first. So Malcolm Gladwell said this in a little bit different way in his book, his best-selling book, Outliers. And what he said was, it's not that individual, those great outliers, those masters, those unique people. It wasn't that they have this unique brilliance or intelligence. They got there because of the din of hard work and because of some very, very unique circumstances. So let's just look at a couple of these people. Bill Gates being one. Now we all know that Bill Gates, very famously dropped out of Harvard and then went on to start Microsoft with Paul Allen. But if we delve deeper into that story, Bill Gates went to a private school called Lakeside in Seattle, and in 8th grade, they already had a computer terminal, which they were using before this was available at most major universities and colleges. And then a few years later, whenever they ran out of computer time, the parents just got them some more time. A few years later, after that, one of the mothers owned a computer company. So again, more free time came at nights and weekends for him and for his friends. And then finally, even a few years later after that, he lived right down the street from U of W. So Paul Allen and he, again, got lots of free computer time on nights and weekends. So by the time he dropped out of Harvard, he had logged 7 years of almost continued computer programming, much more than 10,000 hours. John Lennon and the Beatles, another example. John Lennon and the Beatles, they started playing early in high school together, but they were very, very average. Then came their big opportunity. There was a gig in Hamburg, Germany, and they went to Hamburg for weeks on end, and they would play in Hamburg for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, 6 and 7 days a week. When they left England to go to Hamburg, they were very average. But after 5 trips to Hamburg and playing live 12,000 times together, they were very, very good. So when they left, they were very average. They weren't very good live on stage. They were very good when they came back. Bobby Fischer was probably the only exception of that 10,000-hour, 10-year rule, and that was Bobby Fischer became an outlier, or he became a master in 9 years. The Berlin Academy of Music, Anders Ericsson looked at this, and he looked at the violinists at age 20. And he looked at a long-term study of three groups: the stars, the ones that ended up being soloists in concert, the good students, and the very average students who ended up being music teachers. They all started about the same at about 5 to 6 years of age, and that was they were practicing about 2 hours a week. But that's when things started to diverge. And the stars started playing more at 8, 12 years of age. And finally, by 20 years of age, they were practicing 30 hours a week. And when he looked at the data, the stars, by age 20, had logged 10,000 hours of practice. The good students, about 8,000 hours. And then the very average student, about 4,000 hours. So, successful people, they don't do it alone. The computer programmers don't do it, the rock stars don't do it, the entrepreneurs don't do it. They do it out of the din of hard work and because of unique, fortuitous circumstances. So timing sometimes is important. Well, what about plastic surgery training? Do we abide by the 10,000-hour, 10-year rule? Well, residencies, 6 years. Throw in a year of fellowship, that's 7. And then, as Barry Noon said last year, okay, the best years of your residency is your first year in practice. So let's put in another 3 to 5 years, and lo and behold, we're looking at, again, that 10 years, 10 to 12 years to become a master or an outlier. Now, the problem with the Gladwell thesis, though, it's retrospective, okay? One, and we live in a prospective world, but again, we can't control this timing issue. We can't control these unique events. So perhaps we ought to modify the Gladwell thesis and do this. Let's adopt the 10,000-hour, 10-year rule, but we got to make our own breaks. We got to become a political animal, and we cannot underestimate the very, very importance of emotional intelligence. If there's one name that is the epitome of genius in the 20th century, you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out who that was. Okay. So this man with the wild hair and the twinkle in his eye, this unique brilliance and imagination, his face was the persona, his name was synonymous with genius in the 20th century. Imagination, creativity, and probably a lack of convention was his persona. And these traits, this imagination, this creativity, is as important today in the 21st century, and that will be as important and determine our success as it was in the 20th century. But all was not perfect in Einstein's world, okay? Interestingly enough, he found it very difficult to get his doctorate, and after his doctorate, very difficult to get a teaching position in Zurich. In fact, he wrote 2 of his seminal papers on relativity while working in the patent office in Zurich. He had a very difficult first marriage, and he struggled tremendously as a father. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is finite. Imagination encircles the world. So what does that mean about plastic surgery today? I think we have to beware that that overwork does not stifle our creativity. And unfortunately, I see that even in our unit at the clinic. Okay, that is, I think, a potential problem. We can cut only so far. We can only do so much more with less. Ultimately, we cannot cut ourselves to prosperity. Alan was a resident with me at Penn. He had a photographic memory. He was incredibly well read. Technically, I think he was the best resident in our first year. He had one problem. He couldn't keep his mouth shut. So in those days, we had a very stiff pyramid at Penn. We started with 16 first-year residents, and we went down to 4 by our chief resident year. So Alan was on probation, okay? And again, in those days, if you waited until 9 o'clock, you got to eat dinner at Hupp for free. So we were at 9 o'clock dinner one night, and Alan says to me, Jameson, I am going to keep my mouth shut. I am not going to open my mouth again until I finish my chief residency. And I said, Alan, that's a great idea. Okay. The next week, he's up at the Harrisburg rotation, walks out of the operating room screaming, the chief of surgery doesn't know what he's doing. And Alan was gone the next day. So again, it's not the smartest kid in the class. And it's not necessarily the best surgeons that's going to be most successful. It's that person that you want to be around. It's that person with emotional intelligence. Louis Terman was a chief of psychology at Stanford for many years. He was famous for redoing the Stanford-Binet IQ test, and his passion in life, his long-term study, was that of students, of brilliant students. He got a Commonwealth grant to study 1,500 students with IQs between 140 and 200, because he was convinced that this would be the future elite of our country. And he followed what he called his termites very, very closely for 35 years up into middle age. And what he found was some good and some bad. Very few developed so-called negative stereotypes, because at the time it was felt that these geniuses, these very bright people, would be poorly adept. They wouldn't be fit well into society. They'd be nerds. Well, he found very, very few negative stereotypes. They also tended to be taller. They tended to be in better health, and they were much less likely to be divorced. But they developed good incomes, but not great incomes. Very, very few became nationally known, and there was clearly no national scholars. The critique by a very famous psychologist of the time was, if he had merely just correlated that with others of same socioeconomic status, the results would have been the same. Shoot for the moon. Shoot for the moon, whether that's in your personal life, in your relationships, whether you want to be chief of plastic surgery, or whether you want to be president of the United States. So Robert Caro's book, Path to Power, opens with the following. There is a storyteller who is observing a very young first-year congressman from Texas, Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson is desperate for money to run his campaign, and he's talking with a benefactor who is very anxious to support young politicians. And the benefactor, according to George Root, says the following: I will be happy to support you. I will give you an oil well, and all you have to do is pay me back from the proceeds of the oil well as time goes on. And LBJ says, let me think about it. He comes back the next day and says, no deal. I'll be ruined. I'll be ruined. So George Root can't understand it. He said, why would a first-time Texas congressman be worried about taking oil money? Okay. First of all, his seat is safe. And even if this junior congressman wanted to be senator someday, nobody in Texas would worry about Texas oil money. Little did he know that Lyndon Johnson, this man from the poorest of the poor from West Texas, from the West Texas hills, was already thinking about being president. Those who try to do something and fail are infinitely better than those who try nothing and succeed. Jack Roosevelt Robinson. Jack Roosevelt Robinson was the first black man to go where no black man had ever gone before. For those of you who do not know baseball lore, prior to Jackie Robinson, prior to 1947, no black man had ever set foot on a Major League Baseball diamond. So, on that spring day in April 1947, Jackie quipped to his wife Rachel, I'll be wearing number 42 in case you can't recognize me. Jackie was not the best ball player from the so-called Negro leagues, and that's what they called them, the barnstorming leagues that the blacks played in those days. He wasn't the best ball player. There was Nuke, Don Newcomb. There was Campy, Roy Campanella. There was Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige, maybe the best pitcher, black or white, who ever lived. Okay, but they knew that Jackie had the right stuff. Jackie had what today we would call grit. And so Branch Rickey knew that Jackie was his man. He knew that Jackie would be able to turn the cheek and take the tough stuff that was going to come, the insults and the threats that were going to come. And they weren't kidding. People weren't kidding. This was serious stuff. But Jackie was successful, and he did go on to win the Rookie of the Year award in 1947. But again, all was not perfect in his world. A lot was made of Jackie Robinson as being a four-letter man from UCLA, but he never graduated from college. And unfortunately, his son, Jackie Jr., died a youngster, 17 years old, with a drug overdose. And Jackie himself died, unfortunately, relatively young, blind, and from the complications of diabetes. So Angela Duckworth has coined the term grit, okay? Delayed gratification, being able to, really the power and the perseverance for the long term. Not for next week, not for next month, not for next year, but for the long haul. So life is not a sprint, life is a marathon. And what she did, she studied a large number of children and adults in a whole wide variety of high-pressure situations. She looked at West Point cadets, first-year cadets, and looked at their graduation rate. She also looked at private corporate executives long-term to see if they were, when they would be, and who would be successful. And they looked at Chicago public school children as well. Again, looking at graduation rates. And what she found was there was one thing that stuck out among all others as far as predicting success. And it wasn't IQ, okay, and it wasn't good looks, and it wasn't height, but it was grit. And she said grit could be measurable. Now the question is, can grit be taught? And that, I don't know. But Carol Dweck has coined the term growth mindset. And what she means by this is that the ability to learn is not fixed, and it can change with effort. So failure is not a permanent state. Be willing to fail, to start all over, but this time with lessons learned. How about success in plastic surgery residency? Well, this has been a topic that's interested AAPS for a long time. Don Mackay has been interested in this, Joe Losi, lots of people have been interested in this. This is actually going to be the topic of a combined retreat at the end of April between the RRC, AAPS, and the board, and so I'm not even going to try to touch that. But can residency election process be improved? Well, we looked at this last year, and what we looked at was the factors that would predict a successful resident applicant in the integrated program. And what we found was the usual suspects, all the things that you would think so. High USMLE scores, publications, the average number of publications was 7 per successful applicant. It was very helpful if you came from the top 40 medical schools, but interestingly enough, the AOA status became less important in the last 5 years than it had been previously. But again, one thing stuck out here, and that was the number of integrated spots between 2010 and 2014 have nearly doubled in size, from 69 to 130. The number of applications, however, has basically stayed the same. So what that means is that the likelihood of acceptance has gone from 50% to 70%. Okay. Now, perhaps more astute than our paper was what Peter Taub looked at in early January. And really based, I think, on those statistics which I've just mentioned, they surveyed all the medical students in New York State and then focused on those who expressed an interest in plastic surgery, trying to get to that denominator, not just the people who applied, but the students who were expressed an interest in plastic surgery. And what they found was, even among those students who were interested in plastic surgery, they were unclear of the breadth and diversity of our field. 2, they were put off by the competitiveness and the difficulty of the match process. And 3, even among these people who were interested in plastic surgery, they had a very low level of participation in plastic surgery functions. When he asked them their reasons for pursuing plastic surgery, very interesting, fine motor skills, okay, technique predominated over 70%. When you said reliability, that is a good life, a good income, 26%. But look at leadership. Leadership, less than 1% expressed an interest in leadership when it came to plastic surgery. So my question is, do we need to rethink the match process a bit? Should we look and try to adopt what's done to a limited degree in the Northeast, where they batch the interviews on a certain weekend? Can we do that in other parts of the nation as well? Can we promote research opportunities to a more effective level? Can we encourage plastic surgery rotations? Remember, 70% of the residents who match where they did their sub-I. And essentially, basically, also, can we get more involved in medical school activities so the students know more about the function of plastic surgery? So really, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to do is we need to do a better job of marketing our product. We are a very conservative lot. There are some exceptions, but by and large, we're a conservative lot. Now, we're not risk takers. So is this pre-selection? Is this because, some of us deal with life and death, okay? A mistake can lead to a loss of a flap, et cetera. But I say to you, if we are not failing, we're not pushing the envelope hard enough. Let's look at a few famous failures. Abe Lincoln was fired from his first job in 1832. He failed in business in 1833. He lost 8 elections between 1838 and 1852 before he won his first election. Thomas Edison, a young journalist, approached Thomas Edison and said, "Mr. Edison, why do you continue to try to make light from electricity when you failed so many times?" And he looked at him from underneath his glasses and said, "Young man, I haven't failed. I've just found 6,000 ways that wouldn't work." Walt Disney was fired from his first job. You know why? Okay, a lack of imagination. Several years later, MGM Studios said to him, "The idea of Mickey Mouse is dangerous. You're going to scare women with a life-size mouse." Steven Spielberg was placed in a school of maladapted children before he totally dropped out of school completely. Michael Jordan was dropped from his high school basketball team. You know why? Lack of talent. John Grisham was rejected by 12 publishers before he got his first book accepted for publication. Success is only a moment in time. Mastery is what we should strive for. What we should be most interested in is not that best case of 100, but what can one deliver consistently? Let's see 10 consecutive cases. We thrive, not when we win it all. We thrive when there is more for us to gain before we win. Or saying it another way, coming close to what you think you've mastered will push you even further. A case example, Jackie Joyner Kersey. She missed the gold medal in 1984 heptathlon by 1/3 of a second. Immediately after the race, her husband and her coach said that loss would push her harder to win the gold medal in 1988, which she did with a world record 7,000 points in the heptathlon. So common sense would tell you that the happiness index would correlate with the level of medal winning. And by that, I mean the gold medal winner would be happier than the silver medal winner, who would be happier than the bronze medal winner. It's not the case, okay? Photograph after photograph, study after study have demonstrated this. If we look at our Canadian winner of the silver medal, okay, Dawn Heil, she appears less enthusiastic than Shannon Berkey, the American who won the bronze medal on the right-hand side. And that's because it's all a point of view. The silver medal winner, the Canadian, is saying, what if I had pushed a little harder, if I'd worked a little harder in practice, if I cut that gate a little bit closer, I would have won the gold. The bronze medal winner is saying to herself, my God, you know, a little bit less, and I would have gone home with no medal at all. So this brings me to a story about the Institute chairman. A number of years ago at the clinic, we went from a traditional department division situation, Department of Surgery, Division of Plastic Surgery, Division of Urology, Division of Cardiac Surgery, to an institute or disease-based model. So we have the Cardiovascular Institute, which means cardiac surgery, cardiology, vascular medicine, etc. So we were going to be the Institute of Dermatology and Plastic Surgery, which meant there would be an institute chair. The department chairman of dermatology and department chairman of plastic surgery would report to the institute chair. And I was one of the contestants, I was one of the finalists for this institute position. And I went to the committee and I gave the presentation of my life. I thought I had really knocked it out of the park. I had the job. You know what? I didn't get the position. I found all sorts of reasons why that was the case. Okay. The other guy had friends on the committee. I was being blamed for things that I had no control over. You know, life wasn't fair. So, was there a problem with the committee? No, there was a problem with me. I had been out-networked. So, I could sit there and cry in my soup and blame all sorts of other people for it, or I can get off the mat and try again. Great leaders see around corners. They predict the future. They don't just put their head down, work hard, and do a good job. So, embrace the near win so that next time you can do even a better job. All politics is local. Tip O'Neill was the longest standing Speaker of the House from 1977 to 87, except for Henry Clay and Sam Rayburn. And he popularized, of course, the term all politics is local. And what he meant was, to be effective, the politician had to appeal to his constituents, not at the national level, but had to appeal to them at their everyday local concerns. Case in point. O'Neill was proposing a $1 billion job proposal. It was being resisted by the House Minority Leader from Illinois. So what Tip O'Neill did was he gave a speech that was broadcast back to Peoria, explaining to the people of Peoria how this bill would help correct many of the infrastructure problems that they had in Peoria. So hitting his opponent where he lived, he changed an issue of national politics to the local retail level. So you can't escape politics, whether you're at the biggest university or at your smallest suburban hospital. You've got to get along with people. You can't underestimate the importance of emotional intelligence. Transformational leaders are unique. Transformational leaders will take people where they think they don't necessarily want to go. They tend to be charismatic, they tend to be verbally eloquent, but they also can address people and reach people at a deep emotional level. FDR, we don't think we can overestimate the difficulty the FDR had in addressing the German threat, in spite of the very, very isolationist mentality in this country in the early days of World War II. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Weigh the evidence at hand, make a decision, and go on. Harry S. Truman, the accidental president, probably by most historians' accounts, a better president than he was given credit for historically. He certainly was not in FDR's inner circle. As a matter of fact, he didn't find out about the Manhattan Project until he became president. When FDR died, Truman was called urgently and secretly to the White House. And it said that he ran all the way. He got to the White House. He was ushered into Eleanor Roosevelt's room, and Eleanor Roosevelt put out her hand lightly on his shoulder and said, "Harry, the president is dead." There was total quiet in the room for minutes. He didn't know what to say, so finally he mumbled out, "Mrs. Roosevelt, is there something that I can do for you?" And Eleanor said, "Harry, is there something that we can do for you? Because you're the one who's in trouble now." And so probably no more controversial and no more important a decision than here. Reply to your 41011 suggestion, approved, release when ready, but not sooner than August 2nd. And with that, the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Dwight David Eisenhower, 34th President of the United States, was responsible for the National Highway Project, ended the Korean War, but probably no greater moment for him in history than when he was the Supreme Allied Commander of the Western Front. Now, the Germans knew that there was going to be a second front coming from the West, but they expected it to be at Calais. And there was actually a subterfuge. The Allies put some dummy aspects up there to think that, again, that we were going to attack from Calais. And of course, it came from Normandy. June 5th, 1944, the weather was terrible. And there was no way for aircraft support for the ground troops. The visibility was zero. So that had to be called off. The next day, the 6th, the weather was just as bad. And then came a weather report to Ike that there might be a clearing, and a clearing of the weather later in the day. So Ike got his people around him. It was pretty much a split decision on whether to go or not to go, and Ike said, "Let's go." And of course, we know what happened. It was a successful landing in Normandy. And then he addressed the troops the next day, thanking them and telling them what a wonderful job he did. But in his left pocket, several years later, was found another speech. And that speech was, in case things didn't go well, he took full responsibility if Overlord was to fail. So great leadership can definitely be learned. Be decisive. Great leaders seek out a variety of opinion. They delve into the question. They probe. But when it's time, the discussion is over, it's time to make a decision. They make a decision and move on. Be willing to have people disagree with you. People who have strong opinions are going to find people that disagree with them and actively dislike them. One of Ike's great strengths was that he could get along with very, very difficult people. Know when to build consensus and when it's time to make an executive decision. Again, Ike in Normandy. Care about the people you lead. True empathy is always perceived and always appreciated. Mentor people. Great leaders always have people who want to learn from them. When you're faced with a decision and you don't know what the best decision is, look and see how it's going to affect every member of the team, and then make a decision with the greatest virtue. Fully visualize every repercussion of each of your decisions in advance. Look around every nook and cranny within your mind, and then take a 360-degree look around and see if you do that, the more concrete you do that, the more likely you are to see things that predict things that other people have missed. If you make a mistake, be a man or a woman and admit it. The tragedy is not in the mistake, but it's in the cover-up. The tragedy of Richard M. Nixon was many, but one was Watergate was totally unnecessary. Richard Nixon had just defeated Eugene McCarthy by the greatest landslide in history. The other tragedy was that this was a man of tremendous acumen when it came to foreign affairs. He knew all the big people in the world. He was the first to bring trade to China. Here he is. This is a plane landing in China, and his comment was he was amazed at how few people were there to greet him at Peking. Nixon at the Great Wall of China, the first to visit the Great Wall, American president to visit the Great Wall of China. And then several months later, he was the first president to visit the Soviet Union and improve relations with the Soviet Union. Frank showed you this slide before. The speed of the leader determines the rate of the pack. I actually took this poster down quite some time ago. And that's because leading by example very often has a negative effect on climate with your employees. So Daniel Goleman in the Harvard Business Review has described 6 leadership styles, 4 of which are very positive and 2 of which are negative. The authoritative style tends to be the most effective. And again, these are the great leaders. Okay? They make it very clear to each member of the team how they fit into the big picture. They also make clear where they want to end up, where they want to go, but they let their staff, they let their employees figure out the means. The coaching style also has a very positive effect on climate. It's probably the least one utilized, though. It tends to work best in one-on-one situations. The affiliative style also, people come first, tends to make people happy and create harmony. The democratic style, getting the buy-in from employees also can be effective, but it also can be very exasperating, can lead to endless meetings, and it can make delays in decision-making. The pace-setting style, okay, that we've just talked about, sometimes the pace of the leader can really overwhelm their employees and their staff, and it can create a situation where it creates a feeling of lack of trust. And then finally, the coercive style, the my way or the highway, is clearly the least effective. This destroys cohesion. It creates no new ideas. There's no new buy-in. Basically, people just put in their time and leave. Again, those leaders who have 4 of those 6 leadership styles tend to be the most effective. Great leadership really matters. It matters to the country. It matters to the organization, and it matters to the team. And charisma can definitely be taught. People with charisma tend to use both verbal and nonverbal strategies, and certainly Ronald Reagan was one of the best. So verbal tactics, they use metaphors, they use anecdotes, they use vignettes to describe their situation. They use passion and conviction. They modulate their voice to make their points, and they use rhetorical devices. Nonverbal tactics, they stand up straight, they smile, they connote warmth, they connote strength. They use facial expressions, again, to make their points. Now, almost every large corporation today and university has leadership training courses. And they spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of revenue on this. But the most successful ones really take an evidence-based approach and a so-called maximum performance effort. And what they do is they take their leaders, okay, and they video them, okay? They put them in situations where they role play, they video them, and then they play these back and critique them, because leaders characteristically overestimate their talents when it comes to presentation. The problem is this is very time consuming, leading to anywhere from 30 to 80 hours per person. So why do some people initially succeed but then fail? Well, Richard St. John, an inspirational speaker, okay, professed speaker, had this problem. Okay, very successful, but then he started paying more attention to his stockbroker than he did to his clients, and his business plummeted. So what did he do? He did what every red-blooded American does. He bought a fancy car. When that didn't work, he started taking drugs and drinking alcohol, and it really wasn't until he got his eye back on the ball that things started to turn around. So success is not a one-way street, it's a continuum. A different example, Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley was an All-American basketball player at Princeton, played 10 years in the NBA with the New York Knicks as a forward, was a senator from New Jersey and presidential aspirant. He would be practicing in the Princeton gymnasium 1 hour after everyone else had left. After practice was over, he practiced for an hour just shooting foul shots. And finally somebody went up to him and said, "You're an All-American basketball player. Why are you here an hour after everybody else is gone and practicing foul shots?" And his answer was, "Because if I'm not, somebody else is, and they're getting better than me." So that was then, and this is now. What do we have to do to be successful in the 21st century, in the century of the internet, the cell phone, where the world is flat and everything is intercommunicated? Well, maybe we need to ask some of the following questions. Where are you looking for your next change? Where are you traveling? What are you reading? Who are you spending time with? Remember, you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. What is the diversity measure of your department? What is the capacity to develop relationship with people different from you? Are you courageous enough to abandon a practice that's been successful in the past? Great leaders look around corners. Great leaders dare to be different. They tend to look at the present, interpret the present, and then try to predict the future. So Sam Walton, founder of Walmart in 1962, ran Walmart until 1992. He took it from 1 store to 1,750. He abhorred the status quo. He was famous for carrying a large yellow notepad and going through the headquarters, writing down ideas that would be more profitable, that would increase sales. Whether this was supply chain, whether this was marketing, or whether this was totally new ventures. He abhorred the status quo. His passion for change and for innovation is what drove him to the top. So he suggested avoiding the following mistakes, and one was Darwinian scripts, and that is the attention of worrying and addressing the threats of the here and now, as opposed to those threats that are more subtle and in a more distant future. He also avoided temporal myopia, and that is people change only out of necessity, and they only recognize necessity when there is a crisis. So small tweaks can lead to big change. When you don't know exactly what to do, make lots of small changes, and those small changes will lead to big change before crisis occurs. A recent study looked at the most important attributes of a corporate leader, and they looked at these 8 qualities. And both the CFOs and the employees were consistent in what they said. And that was the most important quality was 1, fairness, and 2, integrity. So, question everything. Don't take your mentor's teaching as gospel. We all make mistakes. 2, focus like a laser as early as possible. Don't be a jack of all trades. Know more about your area than anyone else. Learn a lot about a little. Learn how to write and learn how to present. We all can continue to improve. The worst 4-letter word I know, good enough. You're never good enough. You're never good enough in your relationship. You're never good enough in the operating room. You're not good enough with your residents. Okay. Very good is boring. Surround yourself with encouraging people. Are people around you telling you that what you're thinking about will never work? You know, it's a stupid idea. Or are they encouraging you? If you are excited, you can excite other people. Enjoy your work. Develop a passion for what you're doing. Otherwise, you're in the wrong business. Do things that inspire you, because if you're inspired, you can inspire others. Work hard. Use your imagination to be innovative, but take a break. You'll work much more efficiently. Louis Satchmo Armstrong, okay, trumpet player and a career for over 50 years. But most people don't realize this, but Louis Armstrong was a tremendous workaholic. He never took a vacation. He worked 7 days a week. And you know what? It stifled his playing. And he fell into disfavor. And it wasn't really until he finally took a break and reinvented himself that he became successful again in the later 70s. Don't be a pig. Don't be a pig. Promote and encourage your juniors. Encourage your junior staff to be better than you are. Avoid the Jimmy Carter syndrome. George C. Marshall was called the so-called the Great One. He was in 4 different administrations, and he was really responsible for the Marshall Plan, probably the most important bit of legislation in the 20th century, which really led to the prosperity in Western Europe. But it wasn't called the Marshall. It wasn't called the Truman Plan. It was called the Marshall Plan. Make the impossible the new possible. When I was a kid, the 4-minute mile was said to be impossible to break. Roger Bannister broke it, and since then 12 others have done the same. Fail hard and fail often. Learn to embrace confrontation, solve interpersonal conflicts. And above all, do what's right, not what's politically expedient. And when Jerry Ford had to deal with Richard Nixon and Richard Nixon's resignation and what to do about this, he sought the advice of the grand old man. Get all the facts and all the good counsel you can, and then do what's best for America. Dwight David Eisenhower. And with that, Jerry Ford sealed his loss to Jimmy Carter in the 1976 election. So what is success? For me, it's pretty easy. I was lucky enough to be able to, at least in part, train many, many residents over the year. And I know that many of these residents will become better plastic surgeons than I ever was. Thank you very much.